Yep. Good evening, everyone. So you tried yesterday's example. We created one simple component concept. We just learned how to create components and work with them. We learned about module system. huh? So anywhere when we are working with JavaScript based technologies, module system is important, right? What are different module systems? UMD system, AMD system, Common JS, ES module system. These are all different module system. What is the main purpose of a module system? It enables reusability, extensibility, separation, and so maintainability, testability, maintainability, all this. And we discussed about export, default export, import techniques. We discussed about uh, how we can use aliasing in module system. These are important. Aliasing to use all libraries to reduce ambiguity issues. Now, today we are going to understand. After this, we learned how to create components. Components in React, how they work. So, clean separation and how they work. Now, once we know this, after understanding all this, now today we are going to learn about the concept of uh, data binding. So first I will show you handling data for component. Handling data for component. How we can handle data for component. That is the first point you should know. Handling data for component means, for example, I will use this. Yeah. I'm using this application, and yesterday whatever I showed you, you must practice it perfectly, because every time we create components and we design some example using it. So how to maintain a separate folder, how to add components, and files, how to maintain for them, how do we import CSS, everything I showed. I will add one component called some data binding. Okay, I will just add data binding dot JSX. So export function data binding. Why you need export and all we learned. This is simple data binding. Okay. Now what we want here, npm run dev, and make sure that data binding is in startup. We will use data binding in the startup. Okay. Now this is nothing but our application starts with data binding. So this is data binding. Now what we want is we want to handle some data. For example, we have to bring data from some API. Usually, data comes from API. So, what is API and all, I will show. Once the data comes from any remote API, what we do is we collect the data and we present the data. Suppose user is submitting some details from a form. We collect the details from the form, we store and we submit to server. From server, data comes to us. From our UI, data goes to server. Now the question is how you handle data for your component. So here, generally what we can do is we can simply create a variable, some products, and in that we can store the data that is coming from any place. But it is not recommended. This is not good. It is not recommended to maintain data using variables. For component, it is not recommended to maintain data for variables. Why? Because the problem with variables are immutable types. Variables are immutable types. Immutable means they cannot change the structure. They are fixed. They cannot change the structure. I hope in JavaScript you know what is difference between mutable and immutable. Right? For example, the exact meaning of mutable and immutable. Suppose I will show you. What is meaning of mutable, immutable? Where A is equal to 10, where B is equal to A. So document.write, I am printing the value of A and I am printing the value of B. We are printing the value of A and B. How much A and B are? 10. A and B are 10. So you can see the value of A and B are 10. Now, what happens is the value of A is assigned to B. Whenever I do any modification in A, it will automatically update into B. If any modification in B, will it update A? Will it update A? No. That is why the A is immutable. It is immutable. Mutable means any change in B can reflect in A. Your JavaScript have primitive, non-primitive. Primitive types are immutable. Non-primitives are mutable. They are mutable. For example, see. Suppose now I am showing you here B is equal to 20. Now B is 20. Will it affect A? It will not affect A. A is always how much? 10. It will not affect. But see, what are immutable types and mutable types? These are immutable. Mutable means in A, we have an object. You learned that JavaScript array objects are non-primitive types. Am I right? In this object, we have a name TV. And we are using simply A dot name and B dot name because it is object na. Now both names are TV na. So I am going to access B dot name, apply mobile. B name is changed to mobile. It will reflect A also. That is the nature of mutable. So how we prove mutable and immutable? This is immutable and mutable difference. That means what happens is any change in this B is going to reflect in A. Usually the value changes in A are reflected in B, but B are not reflected in A. Not every time. Only when the data type of A is primitive. If data type of A is primitive, you cannot affect it. If data type of A is non-primitive, that means array, object, then it will allow. That is the nature of mutable concept. Right? Generally in interviews, they ask this type of concept. That means in interviews, what they will ask you one definition. You will give an answer. They will ask POC. POC means proof of concept. You are a Java learner, .NET learner, Python learner. To crack interviews, you should have POCs. You must practice POCs. POC means proof of concept. That means interviewer will ask, what is static, non-static? You will tell some definition. He will say, prove me. Show practically. You are explaining something about static, show me. Right? For experienced people, these type of questions are very frequent. They don't want to listen a definition from you. They want to see the proof. If you say mutable, primitive or mutable, and non-primitive or immutable, they will ask you, show me proof. And this is how we prove. That means we saw that immutable means it cannot be changed. Mutable means you can change. A reference can change. So the point here is variables are actually in a component. When you use variables, variables are immutable types. Immutable types are not good for component because a component should able to change the data according to situation. Because a component is requested several times, every time component state changes. Generally in web applications, a page has several states. In every state, it should behave different. So that is the reason variables are not used in React for handling data. We don't use variables. Then how? How to store data and use data for any component? So what is the first point? How generally data is handled? So data is handled data is handled in JavaScript. Data is handled in JavaScript by using variables. So they configure local memory for a page and can store data. They configure local memory and can store data. So, however, variables are immutable types, immutable types, and not good for components where the state is changing. Generally, multiple requests will happen. On every request, it should change. It should behave in different ways. For web pages and for components where the data is frequently changed according to request, then handling such data using this variable is not good, then how do we store the data and use the data for any component? For that, what we have to do is React uses state. React uses state for handling data. It uses state for handling data. There are so many different types of state techniques. We will learn one by one all of them. Different state techniques are there. How to use the state and how do we work with the state? What we have to do is to use the state and to work with the state, we have to use a hook. React local state is configured by using a hook called, so we have a hook called use state. Use state is a hook. We will have a separate session on the concept called hooks. As of now, hook means it is a function. As of now, simple. Hook is a function. It is a predefined function. What is this function purpose? It will configure the state and it will maintain state for an application, not application, for component. It will maintain state for component so that you can store data and use it across multiple requests. So data can be stored in state and can be used across multiple requests. So it is not recommended to use variables. It is recommended to use a state. So as of now, don't much worry about hooks concept. Later we will detailedly learn. Actually, what is a hook? As of now, just one point. Hook is a predefined function. It is a predefined function of React. It is used to manage different functionalities, right? Later, we will have more detail about the concept of hooks. It's a ready-made function. What this use state function can do, it can configure a local state. How this local state behaves. In this local state, you can store some data. For example, you see how use state works is, for example, we have a component and this is parent. Now for this component, we can maintain state and we can put some data in it. Now, how this state works is, this state can be used anywhere in the component. But for example, there is another component inside and this is child component. This is child component. Now what happens is, the state that you defined for parent, this is not accessible to child. That is not accessible to child. It is available only in this component anywhere. In which component you design, it is accessible only in that. For example, child component can have its own state. Am I right? In this, you can put the data and it is available only for that component. This state cannot be accessed outside. That means even outer members, generally outer members are accessible to inner, but state is not like that. So the state is not accessible. It is accessible only to this component. It is not accessible outside. And very important, after you finished this component, you are using another component. Means we are moving from one component to another. The state is deleted. That means the data of one component is not accessible to another. This is because you know already web applications use HTTP. And what is HTTP? HTTP is a stateless protocol. Stateless protocol means it cannot remember information between requests. When a request is made, memory is allocated, request is processed. After that, the memory is destroyed. You need lot of state management techniques. When you attend React interviews, 95% all questions will be related to state management. That means how to transfer data from parent to child, how to transfer data from child to parent, how to transfer data from one component to another. If I have several levels of hierarchy of components, how we send data to them. All React interviews will be about transporting data from one component to another. And for that, so many techniques are there. We are going to learn all one by one. In that, what is the basic one? Use state. So what is this use state? So use state is nothing but it will configure a local state. So what is the limitation of this local state? So use state configures memory. It configures memory to store data. So which is accessible only to the current component. Can we access from child? No. Can we access from another component? No. So here the question is, can we access from child? So no. So can we access from another component? No, you cannot access anywhere. It is defined only for a component and it can access only in that component. Now, how to use this state? Actually, syntactically here, we need to define the state like this. What is constant? So getter and setter and is equal to use state. I hope you people know this is called array destructure. You learned array destructuring, na? Right? Object destructuring, array destructuring in JavaScript. Actually, array destructure is nothing but generally what you know about array destructure in JavaScript. Array destructuring, object destructuring, these are very basics of array. Suppose var. So we have values is equal to 10, 20. Now we want to separate these two values and store in two different references. Then we can create var a comma b is equal to values. Now what happens? The first value will be stored in A and second value will be stored in B. This is called array destructure. This is general in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we have array destructure, not destruction. It is destructure. Destruction is different, destructure is different. Array destructure is nothing but it separates and stores in separate references. Now, actually, use state is an array. It will return two properties, one getter, another one setter. That means the first one is used to get the data from memory. Second one is used to store the data in memory. That means we can store data in memory using set. Remember, these names you can give anything. But first one refers to getter, second one refers to setter. You can say A, B, but A refers to getter and B refers to the setter. So here so many questions are there. I will tell you here. That means what we do is, so here, how to configure the data? Simple, constant. Suppose I'm giving uname and set uname is equal to use state and we can put some name, some John. That means whatever is stored in memory, you can access this John by using this uname. We can access that by using uname. And here very, very simple concept. Suppose I want to display that in a paragraph here hello, I want to display in a span here. Generally, if it is JavaScript, lot of DOM methods are required. Document, get element by ID. Here, simple binding expression and uname. That's it. That means it will get that value and it will display that value here. You can see it is working. You don't need any DOM method, get element by ID or anything. Just we can bind the data using a binding expression, just a block. Suppose I want to bind this to a text box. Input type is text. And you know that text box will have a value. To the value, you just bind. What is that? We have to bind uname. And automatically it will bind that username. So this is very simple. Binding data is simple. There so many things are there. I will explain one by one. We will discuss about that. First point is how to store data. So suppose I am creating constant age and you can see use state and it is some 22. It's a number. And hello and your age and just put a binding expression age. So your age is something and you just put the binding expression. So suppose your age will be age plus 1 next year, something like this, age plus 1 next year, something we are typing, and you can see it will just get that. It is very easy to bind the data, right? Actually, if I have to do this in JavaScript, lot of DOM methods are required. Now, how you are handling the data? By using state, right? So state contains two things. One is getter, another one setter. What is the purpose of getter? You know. What getter will do? It can read and return value. It can read and return value. So what setter can do? Setter, what it can do is it can store a new value. Am I right? Setter can set the value, getter can get the value. Use state will return two, one getter, another one setter. And generally, what we can do, you can give any name. You can give any name. Suppose age, set age is equal to use state. You can store anything there. So we have constant. Suppose price, we say set price. Use state. So we define some price like this. You can put anything. So sorry, constant, right? Const. Suppose we have constant, some name, set name, and we are having use state, some name. That means anything we can do. And data types I will explain later. You know that what kind of data we can store anything. JavaScript data types. We have primitive types, non-primitive types, array, object, anything we can handle. I will show all data types. We will discuss about different data types. The point here is we have a getter and a setter. We have a getter and setter. So now here, one more point, what we have to do. So this is storing. I hope you understood. This is storing. So how to bind the data? So you can bind any dynamic value to UI elements using a binding expression. What is that binding expression? Block. Understood? You can bind any dynamic value to UI elements using this binding expression. For example, in a paragraph, we want to say hello and we can put a name. Suppose in a text box, input type is text. Suppose we have an value. So I can put price like this. Right? For example, there is a drop down. So select, we can put a value is equal to some age. Automatically, what it will do is it will select the option that matches with the age. So technically you can bind by using this binding expression. How data can be binded? By using React binding expression, by using the curly brace. So we can simply access the data and we can bind the data. I will show examples. I'm just first explaining the point. So don't use variables. So always use the state. So you can configure and you can handle the data using state. Now comes important point. That means what are the questions? So in interviews, the frequently asked questions related to this concept, what type of questions they ask on this, I will tell you. See, the first question asked in interview is why you are using you are using const for state. Why you are using const for state? Can we use var and let? Because in JavaScript the variable declaration is done with var let const. Now the interior question is why you are using const for names? Why can't you use var let? Can I use var and let? Yes, we can use. We can use var and let, but not recommended. It will lead to bugs. Why it is not recommended? Because state must be initialized and used. Without initialization, we should not use the state. Understood? That means a state must be initialized and used. Without initialization, it should not work. And very important, state should not allow assignment. And you learn difference between var, let and const. What is difference? Var is function scope. Let and const are block scope. Var allows shadowing and hoisting. Let and const will not allow shadowing, hoisting. Var let allows declaration, assignment, initialization, but const allows only initialization. Will const allow declaration? No. Will const allow assignment? No. Const allow only initialization. So the question in interview is why we are using const. Can we use var let also? Yes, but not recommended. Why it is not recommended? If I declare using var and let, they will allow to skip initialization. They will allow to skip initialization and they will allow to assign. And state cannot be skipped with initialization. Initialization is mandatory. Initialization is mandatory. It will work, but it will lead to bugs in future. That's the reason. For example, I am using var uname. And here I am using some David, something like this. And you can see that it is working fine. But you will never see in any real-time environment, any React developer is using a var or a let for state. They will use only what? They will use only const. They will use only const. So what is the question and answer? What is the answer? Yes, you can use var and let. You can use var and let for state, but not recommended. But not recommended. So why you are using const? Const. So const is always recommended. Recommended for state. Why? Why const is always recommended for state? So why it is recommended? State requires mandatory initialization. State requires mandatory initialization, so it cannot skip initializing. it cannot skip initialization. It requires mandatory initialization. So what is problem with var and let? Var and let can skip initialization. They can skip initialization. That means I hope you people know what is meant by skipping initialization. Suppose var we have a getter and what setter, and we just skipped initializing. It works. And actually what you can do is later you want to assign the state into that. That's not good idea. You initialize use state. Understood? You initialize into this. So that means initialization is compulsory. You cannot skip initialization. If I use var, it will allow to skip this. That's not good. It's mandatory to initialize. And how you initialize? By using use state. For example, if I write const get set like this, if I write const and get set like this, it shows error. Why? Because const will not allow to skip initialization. You have to initialize. You have to initialize. So it is mandatory to initialize. If it is var and let, they can skip initialization. That's the reason it is not recommended to use var and let. It is always recommended to use const. Another important question. Now, another question asked in interview is, if you configure state with const, then how you can add new values, because const will not allow assignment. Am I right? Is constant changeable? Can a constant change? Yes. A constant can change, but not by assignment, by reinitializing. A constant can change, not by assignment, by reinitializing. Right? That means interviewer will ask like, okay, I will agree with your point, like constant is mandatory for initializing. That means if I declare with const, the value will remain constant. Then how to change? You are saying that state cannot be changed. Then you say that no, state can change. How state can change? Not by assignment. It can change by reinitialize. For example, suppose you see generally in JavaScript, what happens is, suppose var x is equal to prompt. Simply instead of var, I'm using const x is equal to prompt and say enter number. And I'm using document.write x. Now what happens is, it will ask here, I will run this page. It will ask here enter number 30. It is 30. Next time it can change to 70. Constant is changing. That's what you learned in JavaScript. If anyone asks like, is constant read only? Constant means we cannot change. That means, is it read only? Is constant read only? Is constant means read only? No, it's not read only. Read only is different. What is the meaning of constant? Constant means after initialization, the value will remain same across any number of requests. It cannot be changed. But once you make a new request, you can change. Once the request is made, until the request ends, the value will remain same. Once you make a new request, it can be changed. So can we change constants? Yes, not through assignment. Constant can be changed not through assignment, by using reinitializing. For example, see now here, when you define constant, so here setter is there na? Suppose like that we have a set age also. We want to set a new value. For example, we are using set uname is equal to SAM. This is invalid. Why this is invalid? This is invalid because you are trying to assign to a constant. Assignment is not allowed, na? Then how you will send a new value? Set uname, a new memory is allocated. Into that we can send SAM. This is valid. Now, what is difference between the previous and now technique? What is different between these two? Here you are trying to assign, which is not possible. Here you are not trying to assign. You are trying to allocate a new memory again. You are constructing. This is constructor, na? That is a constructor. The parenthesis is a constructor. It is constructing the new memory. Into that you can pass new data. So are you assigning to constant? No. We are reinitializing into constant. Reinitializing into constant. That is the meaning of why we are using const, right? So what is the speciality of this const? If you configure state with const, how you will add new values? So you cannot assign to a constant, but you can reinitialize into constant. So constant, you can reinitialize into constant. That means what is the syntax here? I will just give a basic syntax here. Constant some uname set name. Okay. Is equal to use state. Some name is there. And what we are doing, set name is equal to some new name. This is invalid. Am I right? Because const will not allow set name, and into that we have a different name allocated. This is valid. This is valid. So how you define state, how we can access the state, and how we can use the state, right? These are three basic things you should understand. And very important is constant is recommended for configuring state, right? So we can use var let, they will work, but later they will lead to a lot of bugs. That's the reason always recommended to use a constant, right? I hope you are clear, right? So how do we define? Now, one more important is when to set state. That is also a major concept. You cannot set state like this. 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 This is invalid. Why it is invalid? Because actually what is this happening now is, so from here to here, later we will learn about component life cycle. Actually, all topics are interrelated. We will learn about component life cycle later. Component life cycle means how component starts and how it ends. There will be various phases of component life cycle. Remember, first what is happening is component is being created. The first phase is component is being created. While creating the component, it is creating state. It is storing data into the state. Am I right? While creating the state, you cannot send new data into state. While creating, you cannot send new data into state. Then what to do is, let the component create. After creating component can load. First component will create, after that component will load. This load is called as mount. We call it as mount. Component is created, after that component is mounted. At the time of mounting, after creation, you can set. While creating component, you can define state, but you cannot set a value into state. For example, see now, I tried to set a value into state. When I try to set a value into state, it tries to reinitialize. Na? Reinitialize means it tries to call the component again. The problem is already component is being created. You are calling it again. It will lead to infinite re-rendering. It will lead to infinite re-rendering. That's the reason you observe in that console, you can see here, there is an error now. Go to inspect and check the error. It says that you can see, yeah. So it is going to say that re-render React limits the number of re-renders to prevent an infinite loop. That means component is being created and you are assigning a value. Then to assign a value, what it is going to do, it is going to re-render the component again. Component still not completed. Why you are again reinitializing it? This will lead to infinite loop and immediately React will block it. Then what we have to do? What we have to do is don't define any value into state while creating. Let it create. First creation completed. After creation, component can mount or component can have some events. Events like button click, events like on load, events like change. Am I right? Component can have some events. On that event, you can assign. At the time of mounting or on any event, you have to set the state. You cannot directly set the state while creating. And how to write the mounting phase? To write the mounting phase, we have a hook called use effect. Use effect is a hook which defines actions to perform at the time of mounting the component. Use effect uses a callback function. Understood? In this callback function, this is nothing like just like your HTML page have a body load. That means you want some actions to perform at the time of loading the body. So for body, you write an event called on load. Similarly, when you design a component, if you want any action to perform at the time of loading component after creating, you can define using a hook called what? User. This use effect hook, you can set uname and you can put as some SAM, and you can see that it is going to use it SAM. It is going to change it now. I will remove this text box. Later we will use the text boxes and you can see now it is going to display that. That means you cannot define outside. You are defining outside. That means at the time of creating itself, you are trying to do. That's not possible. Let it create. After creating, you can set. I want to change the age. What is it? Set age. Some suppose 19, and you can see that it changes to 19 and it can display that here. Oh, what is the point? Set age. Acha, age is +1. Na? It is going to display 20. Right? We are just adding +1 and displaying. So the point here is we cannot set at the time of creating. We have to set at the time of mounting. Or later we can write events, button click, drop down, change. On that event, we can set the state. So one more very, very important question. Another important question is when you can, when to set a value into state. When to set a value into state. So what is the answer? So always recommended to set value into state while mounting the component or on any specific event in component. So you should not write directly while mounting and while configuring any particular event. And how to write the mount phase. How to write the mount phase. So all are related to each other. Huh? How to write the mount phase by using the hook. Which hook? Use effect. Later when we learn about hooks concept, more detail you will learn about them. More detail we will learn about them. That means so much is there about use effect to learn, right? As of now, I am just giving a simple point about how to use it and where to use it, right? And what is this use effect? Syntactically, use effect. Use effect uses a callback function. And very important here. Oops, carefully, you can change that. Yep. Just leave it there. Yep. So here there are so many points about use effect we will see later. That means you have to use set state and you have to put some value. It is always recommended to define in the state. So whenever we write use effect, so much is there later. See, one complicated thing about React is all are interrelated. So later you will have to explore all these detailedly, but without knowing them, we can't start. Right? And if I directly go to what is use effect, you will get confused because that is for the people who already know certain interactions in React. So that's the reason as of now, don't put much strain onto this. Just remember only one point. Use effect is used to define actions to perform at the time of mount. You can define actions on unmount. Unmount also means unload, loading and unloading. Later you will see that. Initially, always define this, right? I hope you are clear. I will not go much into hooks concept, but I just showed you one point. What is it? How to store data, how we can access the data, how we can set the data, how we can set the data into this. Okay. Now see the key point. Another important thing you should know is we should know about React. So have one concept, one way binding. React one way data binding. In React, we need to understand that it uses one way binding. In the features already we explained, huh? React uses one way binding. One way binding is nothing but it can access the data and it can present the data in the UI elements, but it will not allow to change them. It will not allow to change them. Actually, for example, see, I think I showed you already. Huh? See, for example, we are having a text box. Input type is text and ID as txt name. Okay. In this text box and in this paragraph, suppose body on load, body load. When body loads, I'm writing some script. So we are writing some script function, body load. On body load, I'm accessing document get element by ID txt name. Into that value is equal to, suppose here we have a variable where some name, some uname is John. And what I'm doing is value is equal to uname. We are assigning. Now you observe carefully here. So the same will be there in paragraph. In the paragraph inner HTML, I'm displaying some hello and plus uname. And you can see in the result, it is going to display the value in the text box and here. Now I click in the text box and try to modify. It is updating, means it is allowing to modify. Why you are allowing to modify if they haven't written any logic for that? Is any logic written for modification? Then why you are allowing to modify? That's not good. If they written for modification, allow to modify. If they haven't written, why you are allowing to modify? This is what React says. React says that I will not do this. I will just bring the data and show it to you. I will not allow you to change until or unless you write some logic for that. That's good. That is good for security. That's what React does. That is what React says one-way binding. That means your data cannot be modified until or unless you intended to modify. Right? For example, you see the same thing in React now. What I will do, let's go to that here. What we are doing, we are binding this uname. I will remove others. Just uname I am giving. Okay. I am binding that uname here, set age. I will remove. Yeah. I am binding this uname, Sam. Okay. I will bind this to a text box. Input type is equal to text and value is uname. I am binding the username into the text box. So it is binded. And see, there is an warning. You provided a value. You provided a value. But very important is without on change, there is no change logic written. Then this will render a read-only field. That means it will not allow to modify. It will not allow to modify. I try to type, it's not working. I try to delete or type, it's not working. You can't modify. This is called one-way binding. So React key feature is one-way data binding. One-way data binding means it will not allow to modify until you intended it to modify. You marked it to modify. It will just bring the data and show one direction only. That means it doesn't means that it doesn't support two-way binding. It will support two-way binding, but explicitly you have to write the logic for that. Right? So many technologies, when Angular came into market, right? They came into a market with a feature called we support two-way data binding. That means you just attach a reference, it will identify the changes, update back without writing event. We don't need to write event. We can just attach, it will update automatically. Actually, in React, we have to write event. They came into the market with a concept like we support two-way binding. Right? So two-way binding, but React comes with a feature saying that we are better in one-way binding. Everything is controversy. I told you now. That means in some concepts that is acceptable, some concepts not satisfying. I already told you that there are more better technologies than Angular React. There are more better technologies than Angular React. These are popular just because of their background. Angular because of Google and React because of Meta. That's only the reason we have more better technologies than these. But we don't try to use them at high level everywhere because we have a risk of support. Support risk will be there. That's the reason. So technically, this is okay, good. What is one-way binding? So React one-way binding is, what is the concept? It is the technique of accessing data from source and binding to UI elements. And the UI element is considered as read only until configured with on change event. Remember, in JavaScript, two-way binding can be handled with any event. Any event means on blur, on key up, on change, anything. But in React, only on change. You cannot get the data back and update with any another event. Here it can happen only with on change. Again, events we will learn later. How to write events and all we will discuss separately. But the point I will show you. See, in the HTML page, we are bringing the data. We are bringing the data here. Okay. Yeah, we are bringing the data and updating. We are bringing the data and displaying here. If I modify, I need to update back into the source. So see what event I'm using. I'm using on key up, or I say on blur. On blur, I will say change name. Okay. We will write a script here. Function change name. On change name, what we do? So uname is document get element by ID. Get element by ID. What is it? Txt name dot value. We will collect the new value and we will display that new value into the